Something is underway now in Maine that hasn't happened before, and that is the collective action of more than 60 organizations, land trusts, conservation groups, to relearn history of Wabanaki people and culture that many of us were never taught in school, to center Indigenous voice in our work, and to return land. We collectively have one goal: to expand Wabanaki presence and relationship with land across this landscape called Maine, because this is really, really good for everyone. It strengthens everyone, native and non-native, because it's ultimately about reconciliation. So as Darren said, I'm speaking to you as an insider to the conservation movement. My voice is that of a white man steeped in that movement, but someone who also believes it has a much, much larger promise to fulfill to Indigenous people and to all of our relations. But this is a map of Indigenous land loss beginning in 1776. As this unfolds, I just want you to see where it begins, how it turns, where it ends. Let's go back one more time. How it makes its way, its progress across this continent. This is obviously, too, a map of colonization, right? So here is also a map of conservation gains across our country during the exact same time. For me, personally, the sacrifices made by Indigenous people are what made me, but absolutely part of what made our conservation movement and the state of Maine. And many of us want to make amends. And many of us believe that the conservation movement is mature enough and strong enough now to recognize this as well. To live here in Maine and be whole requires cultural reconciliation. And land conservation has a role to play in that. And that's really what we're talking about today. I hope this is clear, that the purpose of learning and confronting that history of Indigenous land loss isn't to punish anyone. It isn't to punish ourselves. It's actually to liberate us to do our best work on behalf of people and nature. So conservationists and Indigenous people have always shared a meta-narrative about that centrality of nature. And therefore, we should have had this unbreakable bond between us. But from the creation of the very first national park in 1872 to today, conservationists have systematically removed Native people from nature, first by taking their land, and then by making that land culturally inaccessible, by making Native people mostly invisible in the conservation movement. This is what we seek to change. And the betrayal around it was this: white people said that nature would be better off without Indigenous people. And I've witnessed this betrayal in the land that initiated me in Maine. Although Maine's rivers and mountains still carry Wabanaki names, the people's stories that those names belong to have been mostly relegated to small reservations out of sight to most Mainers. After 350 years of colonization and broken treaties, the Wabanaki now have access to less than 1% of the land that once supported their place-based culture. But in the last 50 years, land conservation groups in Maine have come to steward almost 23% of the state, including countless places of great importance to Wabanaki people, whose burial grounds and neighborhoods are now our second homes, nature preserves, and state parks. And so as a movement, we've had to ask ourselves some fundamental questions. Who owns the keys to these places of utmost importance to Wabanaki people? Well, folks, people who look like me, raised like me, do. And now that these consequences, intentional or not, are within our awareness, we have a responsibility to make amends. And that shift is from land conservation to land justice. And this is what's possible. In Maine, we call it First Light. It's not an organization, but an organizing idea that all of us hold as we seek to work collectively to repair and return at the speed of trust. And at the core of it is three simple verbs: relearn, recenter, and return. And the relearning is for 3 years now. Every year we spent 21 days and more together on the reservations, doing homestays, meeting with chiefs and tribal staff, relearning the history of Maine, reading the treaties, going on canoe expeditions, learning how our different worldviews help and hinder caring for the land. Each year, a new cohort of participants was created. The first cohort had 7 organizations, then 25. This year's cohort has 50 organizations. And recentering. We support the creation of the Wabanaki Commission that was really the genesis of Darren and John to create a forum for Wabanaki leaders on land issues to reach their own understandings and to give direction to us in the conservation movement about what's needed. We've also created a monthly platform for Indigenous people to speak directly to hundreds of the land-owning caste of Maine, land trusts, philanthropies, major timber companies, about what Wabanaki need around land. And centering of Indigenous voice also includes pooling the conservation movement's financial, human, and knowledge resources to end competing among each other and focus on how we as a movement can help Wabanaki people. And that effort is called the Conservation Delegation. And its job is to do the collaborations directly with each Wabanaki community and the commission. What can come of this is strengthening of our shared knowledge of how to protect nature and what she means. These slides are from my colleague, Robin Wall Kimmerer. Many of you know Robin. She's suggesting here the possibilities and a shift in our worldview from stewardship to relationship. Here's the way she observes that the land trust movement and conservation movement sees land. And this is her offering for how land is seen by her community as sacred, as ancestral connection, as home. Is nature something we protect or control or manage, or is nature our mother, our sister, our kin? This is the shift in conservation's worldview from stewardship to relationship. And finally, returning, which is much more sophisticated and nuanced than simply repatriating land. It's really about building the relationships and trust so that we can share things. Power, knowledge, money, and land. And this is what has come of that so far. Supporting the Wabanaki Commission, granting legal access to 62,000 acres in Maine for harvesting medicines, holding ceremony, protecting ancestors, returning lands, and helping tribes beyond the land return that we are celebrating today. And trainings and introductions to our funders, and where all of this goes, no one knows for sure, but my dream is supporting the co-management of significant public landscapes in Maine. And all of this is through this collective effort to change ourselves. We as a conservation movement are finding our humanity and growing stronger because of that.